our webinar today with RevGenius. You're in for a lot of insights from a lot of various industry experts. Before we get started, and before I bring in our guest speakers, I wanted to just orient you all around Hubalo. So you're in Webinar Plus, and so today we're going to be asking you some questions as well, and asking you to participate in a few polls. So you'll see that on the right side of your screen. So you'll see all the polls pop up. And then obviously you can ask your questions as well, which we'll get to the end, and you can click the Q&A section to do that. But of course, we want you to interact. So send reactions as we share some notes with you, like if you agree, or you can hit that 100 emoji there to react. And also we want you to chat in your inputs as well as we go through our content today. But before we get started, before I bring in our speakers, I want to ask a really controversial question to just kind of get everyone warmed up here. It's a controversial question that's really torn my teams apart internally here. It's a big debate that we have. And the question is a hot dog a sandwich? Really important questions here to start our webinar. I'll let you all debate in the chat there as I bring in our guests. I'm going to bring in Jason, Tara, and Demand Jen from Lavender here. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And in perfect timing, I think your audio is acting.
Sorry, that broke out a little bit.
You sounded perfect earlier, and now we got static. So while Jason is fixing his audio there, I do want to hear from everyone in the chat. Is a hot dog a sandwich? And I'd like to hear from you because I'm going to mute Jason real quick. Are you guys getting that static as well?
Yeah.
Now it sounds like this is Jason in a webinar. Hold on 1 second. Okay, that was Jason, right? When you muted? Okay. Sorry about that, everyone.
I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem. You sounded great earlier. I'm sure we'll get it sorted out. At least we know what it was. Man, that sounded terrifying. I don't know about you guys.
It really did.
Hot is the webinar possessed. Okay, so that's what it sounded like to me. Well, thanks everyone for your patience as we're getting our technology sorted out here with the audio. Okay, I'm only seeing a few people chat in if a hot dog is a sandwich. Oh, someone even put in a JPEG. I'm kind of scared to open it. Oh, wow, there's a whole diagram on that. We're actually going to a baseball game later, so I kind of wanted to get some thoughts from everyone here. But so while we're waiting for Jason, why don't we start with just a quick round of introductions? So Jen, let's start with you.
Yep. So my name is Jen Allen Knuth. I started working at Lavender back in January. I'm on the marketing team overseeing community growth. Prior to that, I spent 18 years as a salesperson. So I am a newly reformed former salesperson turned marketer. Very excited to be here today.
Love it. Thanks for joining us, Tara.
Hey everybody, I'm Tara Pawlak, VP of Demand Gen at Revenue Grid. I started at Revenue Grid in January, and before that, I've been in marketing positions my whole career. And I have 2 degrees in marketing, so I like to say I'm an intentional marketer. But I also like to follow the revenue all the way to close one, so I can kind of teeter in the the bottom of the funnel from a curiosity standpoint, right? So, but yeah, super happy to be here as well.
Thanks, Tara. Okay, perfect timing. Jason, are you back? And the demon is.
Is it sounding better now?
You sound so much better.
Okay, good. So
We're
sorry
just
about that. I have no idea what was going on. So yeah, doing intros. Ready for me to go?
yes, your turn.
Awesome. So yeah, Jason Hubbard. I'm COO at RevGenius. Bulk of my career and background has been in demand gen, marketing, partnership roles, including running a couple of agencies that started on my side. So entrepreneur as well. So broad background across a lot of the stuff, but deep background on demand gen marketing side of things.
Sweet. Thanks, Jason. All right, we're going to jump right in. So, obviously, you know that today's topic is all about building authentic connections. So, before we get into the how, let's first define what this looks like and share some examples from our panelists. So, I'll start with Jen, aka Demand Jen. As a community leader of a fast growing brand, what connections are authentic and actually effective?
Yeah, I think so. This was a lesson I wish I had learned sooner as a seller. When I was an AE, I thought it was my job to try to convince everybody that we were the best solution in the world and to portray that through how I talked about our company. Looking back, one of the pivotal shifts that I had as a seller was in 2020 when I realized that I was making it really difficult for someone who was a prospect or a buyer to spend time with me because I was pushing solution, whereas they were looking to simply learn. And so I made a shift where I realized my job as a salesperson is not simply to sell. I use the word Sherpa here. It's like maybe not the best word, but our job as salespeople today, where buyers can go out and learn on their own, is to aid them in how they think about learning about their problems well before we ever talk about solutions. And so that caused me to show up differently. It caused me to bring a different point of view to my conversations, but also my content, my interactions in communities, on social media, because I think when we push pause on just trying to compel everyone to buy from us, and we look to deeply understand and be helpful with problems that people are facing, I think what we find is we build a much more authentic connection off the basis of a problem as opposed to trying to get someone to buy a solution. So that's kind of how I evolved my thinking of it as a salesperson.
Yeah, I really like that sort of resource first, right? And the selling almost comes natural out of that. No pressure, but I feel like that does set the bar much higher and changes the industry a little bit, right, with the sales industry. Jason, I want to pivot to you about, because since you're so involved in these events and webinars and you're seeing all the different activities that RevGenius, this community, does, what engagements and connections really matter to you and your team? Oh, you're on mute. That's like a bingo spot, right? Someone's always on mute.
No, these are great questions. And at the end of the day, being authentic, especially in a business context, I think is primarily around leading with and focusing on being authentic in the sense of providing value, trying to help, trying to get to the bottom of what that person needs, is struggling with. It's that whole active listening thing. So, if you're talking at somebody and doing the majority of the speaking, you're probably not being particularly authentic. You're trying to pitch or present your own agenda. And so that attempt or that desire to help and really lean in and requires a degree of empathy, requires that active listening. And typically the results that you want, the same thing that Jen was talking about, they're going to typically follow and flow from that, and they're going to typically flow much more effectively by trying to do that right thing and letting the rest come versus trying to focus on the actual result that you're trying to achieve.
Totally. As a VP Jen, thanks, Jason. Tara, as a VP of Demand Gen, you have this bird's eye view of all the different activities and all the connections and engagement across your marketing teams and maybe even, your sales teams. What makes you go, yes, that's the engagement that we needed?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's the $1,000,000 one, right? Always. But I really think, and I've said this before, that if somebody hears your brand or mentions your team or your company, if they can smile at hearing that, you've done your job as a marketer. And that's actually not that easy to accomplish. Obviously, that is probably impossible to track as well. That's a different conversation. However, what I mean by that is they're getting a positive response from your activities or your touch points or your whether it's your marketing team or your sales team kind of interacting with them. And that's the level of engagement that you really want. And figuring out how to get there is, of course, the hard part as marketers, right? But that's really like the ultimate goal. And I say that because a lot of people, when they go look for tech and they have a problem and they're looking for a solution, you're not the only one out there, right? There's a lot of different choices and they do so much research these days. We know that on themselves, like B2B is like B2C. It's kind of like a consumer, right? How we purchase a lot of software. And so you have to think about that experience from the very, very beginning. And there's been some companies that I've been the purchaser, the decision maker, that I had such a great experience and I can still remember that. And I didn't even buy their tech, but I had a great, authentic connection and experience. So that's really something to think through. You have to do a lot of research and put a lot of process in place to figure out what that actually means for your company. But that to me is the ultimate level of connection and engagement.
Yeah, definitely. That's almost its own differentiator, right? Apart from the product, is how we're connecting with our audience. So now I want to connect with our audience and ask them a question. So I'm going to launch this poll here because we want to get to know what's top of mind for you, what's the challenge for you all, so that we can kind of prioritize that in our discussion here. So for all of you, what's the toughest to crack when it comes to authentic connections and engagement? So I'm going to go ahead and publish this poll here. So you should see that in your poll section, and tell us what you think. While everyone's voting in, I kind of want to play a little family feud with our panel. What do you think the survey's gonna show us? Tara or Jen?
I'm going to guess getting the right people to engage.
I was going to go with A, which is creating engagement points, but it's those go hand in hand, A and B, because you want to the right engagement points mean engaging with the right people.
Yeah. I was going to say.
Well, I'm sure right now, and it looks far and forth, but creating points is the now. Let's see, it's going back and forth. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this poll. Actually, people are still entering, so I'm just going to take it off the screen real quick, but you guys can keep voting and we'll take a look at that momentarily here. So I want to go on to the next section here, and let's keep in mind that the response so far is people are saying they're having challenges with creating those engagement points and also getting the right people to engage. So let's keep that in mind, panel. So on to this next section here. Tara, I want to ask you, what does it actually take to create these engagement points, right? With the right people at the right time. A lot of things to get right. No pressure, but what sort of tools are your teams using, whether that's tech or maybe methodologies? We'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I'm excited. My answer addresses what the poll came out. That usually doesn't happen, right? You got to think on the fly. So, from my team's perspective, and I said this before during when we were chit-chatting, but I really believe you have to build the process first. And I say that because I don't believe any tool is going to come in and like save the day. And some marketers make that mistake. We all have, right? But a tool is just a tool, and it's the way that your team adopts it, understands the approach, and really how it's going to help elevate what you've built already. So that's what I want to say first and foremost. But the two tools I would say, at least from a marketing end, to understand how to create the right engagements, going back to our poll there, is some level of either it's a customer journey tool, which those do exist out there, or certain attribution softwares do this. And I know attribution is more of insights for marketers. It's not 100% accurate at all. Don't believe the vendors if they tell you that. So it's supposed to just guide you as a marketer. And a lot of them actually show you all different types of activity and journey that you see through your new customers and can go back in history. And then, of course, you can pile on with the tool, you can pile on customer research, you can do, focus groups and surveys. And I really believe when you marry those together, you can get a really good sense of a couple workflows of your like typical buyer and what that looks like. And so once you kind of map that out, it's not about the journey you want to bring them on, because your marketing team's like, oh, we have LinkedIn ads and we're going to invite them to this dinner and this event and this is what we got going on. It's more of understanding, hey, look at our ICP and look at these customers and the similarities that we found that are kind of the most common ways of engaging with us, and really understanding that. And then the second tool I would mention, besides some customer journey or attribution, would be an ABM platform. And I say that with a little bit of a grain of salt, more because you want to be targeting the right people. And so you could do this in different ways. And there are some ABM platforms that aren't as expensive. I know they're a big, I say this because budgets are tight right now. They're a big expense for most marketing teams, but you can get to a level of account data that you understand with your sales team the right personas and accounts that you want to target. So when you marry those together, it should be the right type of process that you build.
Yeah, thanks for kind of, putting those two together, because I think it's also important. I love what you said, that it's the users, right? This is what your team does with the tools, especially with budget cuts, right? You might have to cut some of your tools that you got to be creative with it. But I love how you're showing too, like it's not really one tool that's going to do it all for you. It's how you're going to use them to kind of even enable, right, and enhance them. I want to shift now. Thank you, Tara. I want to shift now to Jen and kind of how maybe brand plays into building authentic connections and setting your sales up for success. So Lavender, I feel like is such a unique brand. It exudes authenticity, right? Like if you've seen any of their brand content. I've even heard someone say that it's the Barbie to outreach Oppenheimer. But how does your team, like both marketing and sales, leverage that brand authenticity to engage with your ICPs?
First of all, that is such a nice compliment. So thank you. And I just want to, Tara, your answer was like just candy to me. I just love that. So on this one, I picked the word empathy because I think one of the things that I certainly found myself screwing up as a salesperson, and now I'm far more mindful of as a marketing person, is sometimes we are so self-obsessed with what we do and how great our solution is. Our tonality of how we build connections completely lacks empathy. So like now that I'm in a buyer role, I'll get messages that are like, I don't think anyone would actually say these things in real life. And I think sometimes we forget that we're still building a human connection. So it's things like, I had someone say to me today, are you frustrated with your onboarding program not working well? Like, y'all, we don't even have an onboarding program. Like, stop making these assumptions. Like, we should, but these assumptions really come across that are really off-putting. And so one of the reasons I joined Lavender as a company was because when I was selling, I always appreciated the tonality of how they were showing up online and anywhere they were present. And what I mean by that is they recognize, and now we recognize, the job of writing a cold email is really hard. So I could sit here and write content that beats up sellers and SDRs and tells them how bad their cold emails are. But what does that really do to build a connection? Very little, right? Like, it's not like any seller wakes up in the morning and is like, I want to send the world's worst cold email today. In the reality, they're doing the best they can with the information and the resources they have. And that's almost always true, regardless of what you are selling and who you are selling it to. And so I think one of the things we're really intentional about is trying to be mindful that the person on the other end of the email, the call, the piece of content is still a human being. And we rarely make deep connections when we are offensive or put people down in our outreach. And so if you look at our content, yeah, we play around with, like, we've got a character named Lavender Joe who writes terrible emails and does all the things we're not supposed to do. But we make it funny so that people can laugh at it and feel safe saying, like, I've been Lavender Joe. I've been Lavender Joe, right? Me, myself, I've done some of that stuff. But when we can laugh at it, it makes it a little bit easier to start on that journey to be like, maybe I need to work on this. So I think regardless of who you're selling to and what you're selling, a lot of it comes back to empathy, that most people are doing the best job that they can with the resources they have available. We don't need to have a presumptive, assumptive tone in our outreach and our content and all the things that we're doing to try to build connections. If anything, it should be the exact opposite. It should be recognizing, acknowledging that, and then aiding them with the job to be done outside of them buying your solution.
Yeah, it is kind of a pet peeve for me when I get emails like, "Are you struggling with this?" It reminds me of those old school TV ads, or like those non-stick pans of like, or like
Yes.
fumble the pans. And I'm not really like that. I do appreciate more of like that. Hey, I see you're doing a great job. How much more can I help you, right? To like take it to the next level. So I love what you're saying about the empathy and like, let's bring people up versus like point out how much they're struggling.
Yeah, but like, very quick example, because I read over 100 cold emails last week to give people advice, and one of the things I saw, like, for anybody selling into cybersecurity, it's like we have this feeling that we have to teach people that cyber risk is a problem. Like, they know, trust me, they know. They're doing what they can on it. So to your point, like, we have to stop treating people like they're damsels in distress. Like, let's just start treating them like human beings. That's a great, easy way to start.
Yeah, Jen, just one more question for you on this. As people move along the customer journey, right? As maybe they're top of the funnel, now they're customers, or now they're actually like advocates for you. How does that engagement change? Like, how are you changing up that engagement with them? I know that could be a whole nother topic for a webinar, but
Yeah.
just quickly.
No, I think it's celebrating their wins with them, right? So one of the things we love, and you may have seen this, may not, but like on LinkedIn, when people score a 100 on their cold email in Lavender, they post it on LinkedIn because it's hard to do. I've never even gotten 100, right? So that's an example of an existing customer who has an achievement and they're proud of it. We could just hit like or have our company account hit like, but what we do as an organization, and I'm not saying everybody should do this, but we rally around that, right? And we celebrate that person and promote that person, because the thing that we have as a business right now is a lot of social currency. So if we all chime in on that post and like and engage with it, that's a win for that person because it elevates their post. So it doesn't always have to be that as the example, but looking for moments like that where you can elevate and celebrate your customers and give them a sense of pride in the achievements that your solution helps them make. That's just one example that we try to be good about as a company.
Cool. Jason, I'm going to switch to you and ask you, like, from a sales perspective. I know if I say the word persistence, it might trigger this. But you energize the sales team without feeling too after an experience for a webinar. And how can you be without being pushed?
I mean, I think it all boils down to that, providing value and actually being somebody that, is helpful and is actually moving the needle. And, being there relative to the things they want and need. So, one of the things that drives me the most crazy is somebody, runs a webinar, it's, largely top of the funnel, maybe middle of the funnel level content that's on there. There's not a ton of intention or intent signaling coming out of that. And so, you generate, 150, 250, whatever leads out of it, you pass it to a sales team and have them hammer away at it. That's the opposite way that you want to do it. And there's a reason why. Like, you're actually doing fairly well if you've got very low single digits, 2-3% conversion rates to a qualified opportunity. That's the wrong kind of persistence. Taking what you can and either gathering or generating, and this is one that's underappreciated, intent signals so that you actually know where that person is, what they're actually trying to respond to, what they're struggling with, whatever, and then being responsive to those signals or conversations that you're having. That's where the key really lies in it. And so, if you're just hammering away at somebody trying to pitch, the product or trying to get a demo or a sales call scheduled, like, there's a reason why those rates are so abysmally low. It's about trying to provide value and figure out what that actual value is and where to do that. And so, executing against that is where the rubber meets the road, and that's where it gets difficult and complicated. But at the end of the day, that's what you need to be aiming to do. If you're just hammering away at somebody with the same or a slight variation on an email template and thinking, hey, if I hit them with, it used to be 8, now it's a dozen, maybe it's 16 touches in a sequence, that eventually they're going to just, by being beaten over the head, finally agree to talk to you. Like, this is not the way to do it. And frankly, it's the reason why we wound up in the shape that we're in right now, where cold outbound is basically dead in the water for everybody. Like, we beat that horse to death. And there's a reason why nobody will respond to it. It's not effective anymore. It never really should have been, but we all operated under this volume automation model that if we poured enough into the top, that we would have something significant come out the other side. And frankly, I'm kind of grateful that that's finally falling apart. I think it's long past due.
Thanks, Jason. All right. I actually want to go to another poll. I know our panelists shared a few different examples here, and we are going to move a little bit faster because we spent a lot of time on these topics, but we want to ask you, and there's really no right or wrong answer to this. We just want to get to know, what you're up to and what your challenges are, what's working for you. What's the most successful tool for generating effective engagement? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll here. I'll put it on this screen too. Jason, if you can add anything else on this, what would you add?
The community is what I would add. But I mean, I think at the heart of it, it's finding opportunities to be able to figure out who these people are, where they are, and then what they're talking about and what their needs are. And so, any place, that goes back to that intent signaling. Any place you can find that, and then find those organic opportunities to engage, that's typically where you're going to find the most bang for your buck and be most effective.
All right, let's experience it. Taken here. Right. Jason, do you mind muting? Thank you. All right, I'm going to move on to we learned a lot about what to do. Now we're going to just quickly remind you what not to do, how not to engage, avoid these faux pas. So, Tara, can you share a little bit about your tip on what not to do?
Yeah. So my words up here are fake personalization. So this is also something, if you've been doing marketing for a while, we've all done. All right, let's just admit it. Jason was just talking about it. The easiest example I can think of is trying to ramp up outbound and, just pulling in the CRM first name, last name, title, and where you work, and acting like that's personalization. I think that's something that as marketers, we need to all agree that we should not be talking about that, doing that, making that be something that you explain internally that, we're going to send this mass personalized email. The word mass and personal just don't really go together, right? If we just take a step back. So that's something that Jason already kind of mentioned it though. It's not a volume play anymore, and I think this is really hard for sales leaders to hear, honestly, because they do the math. I get it. They have the accountability. They got the dials and the emails and the LinkedIn outreaches. And then we all do conversions rate, right? And say, if we hit this many, this is what's going to come out. But we have to go back to is that the quality that you want? Right? Is that the way we want to treat people at the end of the day? Like Jen was saying, we're all humans here. How much is that email with this fake personalization really doing at the end of the day? Is it helping your prospects smile? I don't think we might be laughing at the email if we open it at all, or unsubscribe or delete or whatever. So that's just something that as marketers, we need to stand up against, because sometimes there's someone over you or in a different department basically saying we need to do this, and we need to be strong enough to say, I'm not going to do this. It's not going to create authentic connection. And I've done it many times. So if anyone out there needs some help, I'm willing to help you take your stand and approach it a different way.
That's great. Jason, you already talked a little bit about this, but what are some of those outdated methods?
Yeah, I mean, the outdated methods are the fake personalization, the spray and pray, the leveraging of automation to access, being able to kick out massive numbers of emails, powering through a power dialer and, hitting, hundreds and hundreds of dials a day, and, all of that stuff that we have all come to hate, but, was an easy button to be able to model for way too many teams and, sales leaders on these approaches. And, you can say the same thing on the marketing side. Generic content, clickbaity stuff that doesn't actually provide value, all of those things that you're just trying to drive traffic and then trying to drive conversions on. And ultimately, all of this stuff is really self-defeating, not just from the standpoint of creating a scenario where people are going to tune out and it's not going to be effective anymore and all of that stuff. But this also leads to the problems, that a lot of companies are dealing with from an NRR standpoint, where you drove just by beating people to death, to ultimately sign and take a deal that was never a proper fit for them. And then they churn on you, and it's any wonder. Or you're generating leads through, bad clickbaity type content and stuff like that, and they're not actually qualified for the team. And, it's a classic way to get to that problem of, sales and marketing pointing at each other. And that content piece of it as well is that generation of or internally engineering intent signals. That's one of the most powerful things and underutilized things that I see a lot of marketers doing, which is, in a nutshell, creating content that would be really, really weird for somebody to be engaging with that didn't have intent or didn't have a problem that they're trying to solve around. And so whenever you can create really, really compelling content around those that has that use case or that focus on it, holy crap, those first party intent signals that you're generating for yourself are so valuable, especially compared to, kind of that easy button stuff.
I posted a few of our audience's chats here. Eddie sounds like he's totally in agreement that these are outdated. And then I loved Lily's post about, and I put it back on the screen here, just about how she bonded with a lead over their hate of bananas once. That is personalization. That takes more work than you'd think, right? But it's so much more authentic, and they probably like talking with you more than maybe another pushy salesperson, right? So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, and I think that example is a great one to highlight, though, because this stuff is hard. There's a reason why the other side of it was an easy button that everybody leaned way too hard on. Trying to figure out where these people live, what their problems are, trying to get enough understanding of them to be able to empathize, finding those opportunities for organic, engagement. All of these things take a lot of work, a lot of effort, and they're not easy to do. They're not easy to train on. And so that at the end of the day becomes the problem that we all have to solve for. I think we've all known for most of our careers the right way to do it. It's just the right way to do it. It's not easy.
Yeah, it's when I think you get pressured for like numbers, right? But like what's the quality? And I think some people have gotten past that or maybe um they're now prioritizing numbers and I think it's the results show like that's not working. Jen, I wonder, do you have any like cringeworthy examples of what Jason shared about?
Gosh, just open an inbox, open anybody's inbox, and there's cringeworthy example. You would think I work for Lavender. We are helping sellers write cold emails that don't suck. You would think that people would be a little bit mindful of the cold emails they send to an organization that does this. They don't. And that's the problem, right? It's like, it is exactly what Tara and Jason are saying. It is, I've got to hit an activity metric. I believe that volume is my path to get there. And I think one of the most, like alarming statistics that shows this is actually not working. This data came from SalesLoft. Last year, if you sent a personalized email, there was a 100% increase in the likelihood for reply. That was last year. This year, the number is a 1,200% increase. Year over year, that is wild. Like, I was like, I'm not even sure I believe it until I saw the data. What that is telling us is a loud and clear message that buyers are sick of being in automated, unthoughtful mass cadences. And so I get it. If you're selling SMB, it's not like you can sit there all day and send one-to-one emails to everybody, but we have to be thoughtful. We have to show we've done some thought, put some thought into why them, why now in our outreach, even if it's a cadence or a mass email, right? And so I think every day I open my inbox and it makes me really sad for the sake of the sales profession and marketing profession that we are still encountering this activity versus quality problem. The one I put on the page here on fake expertise, this is specifically speaking to content, like particularly in social. And when I was first doing it, I felt like I had to be an expert and I felt like I had to write these posts that were so like professional and they had to be like so buttoned up and backed by data and all this stuff. And what I realize is that I'm not alone in that. A lot of people feel that way. And what we get on the other end of that is really vanilla, dry posts that do nothing to activate like what Tara was talking about, which is like activate an emotional response. And so one of my biggest lessons learned is when I stopped trying to be an expert and I started trying to be more human and just say, look, when I was a seller, I screwed this thing up until I learned this. And now as a result, I do this instead. People really attach to the humanity of a message like that way more than like, I'm an expert and you should listen to me. So I think regardless of your tenure, your role, whatever, if you approach content with, I'm learning out loud, I'm sharing things that work, didn't work, and I'm not like claiming to be the world's best expert, I think what you'll find is more people lean in and have a conversation on that as opposed to these really dry vanilla posts.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice because especially on social, right? Like talk to us like you would talk to a colleague that you're actually giving advice to. That'll resonate so much more. And then on the point on like the spray and pray, the mass personalization, I feel like those hitting your numbers, but also hitting them with the wrong messages can do more harm than anything. Like I have a cringe-worthy example where someone sent me a cold email and it had a bunch of exclamation marks and it was like the exact example we shared earlier, which was like, are you struggling with this exclamation mark? I'm like, okay, cool, you can check off on your list that you sent me an email, but you also managed to like irritate me, right? Like that hurts not only your credibility as a salesperson, but the brand as well. So, great advice on just being way more thoughtful and a good reminder too that personalization is more work, but it is more effective, right? There's no shortcuts, but there are tools. So all right, I'll go ahead and move on. And we're actually wrapping up here. So I know we covered quite a few things. So if you want, we have this quick page that you can screenshot. And so we'll just go ahead and kind of make a quick round on some of the topics that we covered today. So I'd love for Tara to cover like what those elements of effective engagement are, that if you can summarize what we talked about. No pressure.
It's all good. So to summarize, the best thing you can do is know your prospects and your customer base first and foremost. You can do this in a way that doesn't require budget. It requires a lot of work, right? Research, interviewing, all that. And you need to make sure that you understand your buyers and your buyers without your software. I'll say that again, your buyers without your software or whatever you're selling, to really understand what makes them tick, what makes them engage, why they would take certain actions, and what really speaks to them. And then after that, you start to understand what engagement that they like and how you could kind of replicate and how your brand fits into that. And then with that, there's tools, of course, you can look into. But my biggest piece of advice here is to build a process to really understand your buyers and for who they are, and their pain points and their needs, and really guide them on the journey that they want to go on.
Jason, I'll pick on you. I'm kind of going out of order, but I'd love to hear you.
Love to hear you.
Thinking cohesive engagement.
Yeah, so it's all about, we've hit on each one of these. You've got to figure out who your targets are. You need to figure out where they live, where they interact, where they talk. And then you need to be able to have opportunities to engage with them. Lily made a comment about, panicking backed by data. And as a growth marketer, I have always been data driven in everything that I've done, but I get where she's coming from, and the recipe for how to deal with it on my experience, and it's something I've leaned extremely heavily and hard on, is marrying that qualitative and the quantitative sides of it and having that be a constant two-way street. And if you're somebody on the marketing or demand gen side of things, it almost requires you to have somebody on the sales team or some bodies on the sales team that really kind of get both sides of the equation, and that they will proactively reach out to you, give you that boots on the ground, one-on-one interaction feedback on it. Because whenever you're doing marketing, you, by necessity, you're doing that 20,000 foot level thing. And so it's got to be data driven, because you don't really have another way to do it. And unfortunately, as marketers, we way too rarely get the opportunity to engage directly with prospects, leads, opportunities like a salesperson does day in and day out. And so marrying that qualitative and that quantitative side of it is absolutely essential to being able to effectively, do any of the stuff that we're talking about.
Thanks, Jason. Jen, any parting advice? I know we just shared a bunch of what to avoid. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just regardless if we're in marketing or if we're in sales, I think today it's just inexcusable to not understand or have a hypothesis about the pains our customers might be going through that trigger a need to do something. I think it's also inexcusable to ignore status quo as a competitor, right? So when we are thinking about building connections, obviously, we want those connections to be thoughtful. We want those connections to be human, but we're also still working for organizations. So do the work to understand what are those trigger events that might cause someone to actually lean into social or start looking at content or go to your review site, whatever the case may be, and deeply understand that. Because when we understand the human motivation behind an action, it allows us to show up in a way that's really, really helpful for a buyer or prospect. So I think it's okay if you're I actually don't know the answer. It's not okay to not know the answer and do nothing about it. So if that's listening to sales calls, if that's signing up for communities and watching which conversations are happening with your ideal target customers or stakeholders, there's just way too much that's available today to make it okay to not know the answer.
Thanks, Jen. I do want to ask the audience if they have any questions for us. I didn't see any in the Q&A, but feel free to drop them in the chat too if you have any. Give it just a few seconds here. we can even keep this conversation going on social. You can obviously reach out to all of us on social. We do thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speakers, Tara, Jen, and Jason. We also hope that you enjoyed your time here on Hubelo's Webinar Plus. If you want to learn more about this platform, definitely take a look at that link there that I just posted. And well, let's see here if there's any other questions here. Eddie, I'm so glad that you're enjoying this conversation. We are so glad that you're able to join us. I don't see any other questions. We are hitting the 45-minute mark here, so we can wrap up if you don't have any questions. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to learn with us and chat with us. Again, thank you to the panelists for joining. You have the QR code to connect with us on LinkedIn. We can keep this conversation going there. We'd love to, talk more about how to build authentic connections. Thanks, everyone.